If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mind Shock. This is your host, Bruce McGuire.
And JR.
And we are here in memoriam of September 11th and the September 11th conspiracy, so to speak, has been one of the most requested topics on Mind Shock, and I've purposely put it off because I don't really want to go too deep down that rabbit hole. So we're just going to do a brief summary and brief coverage. Obviously, JR has some insider knowledge. You've worked with people affiliated with the Pentagon, correct?
Yes.
So we do have some questions, some inconsistencies, but this is, of course, what everybody can agree on, even the most hardcore conspiracy theorists, is that at least first responders lost their lives. So there's a
Yes,
certain
they
amount
did,
of
Bruce. I think that, that's one thing that, one of the most tragic events is that, innocent American citizens, even people that were just drifting through the Twin Towers for the day, that were not American citizens, as well as first responders that responded to the actual eclipse itself,
what I want to do,
lost their lives.
especially right from the outset, is these volunteer firefighters, emergency medical personnel, first responders, these people, if there was a vast conspiracy, some people believe that no one was even in the building or almost no one is in the building. And I do have some personal stories from people that I know that have worked at the World Trade Center that were told not to come in. I will tell them for the first time. I've never actually spoken about them. But I think what everybody could agree on, regardless of which conspiracy or coincidence theory one goes with, obviously we'll address the holographic plane theory and a couple other things. We're not going to go too deep, but this topic was requested, and of course JR was requested to cover it as well. So what we could all agree on is first responders lost their lives, and the ones that didn't suffered severe health issues in the years afterwards. And they were only partially compensated after a lot of pushback by the government. So I have no words for that. I mean, these people put their lives literally on the line, and many of them lost their lives. Regardless of whether you believe the event happened as reported or not, these people deserve some respect. These people deserve a memoriam for their sacrifice and their willingness to literally run into burning buildings that were collapsing in order to save people. And I think in a lot of the hoopla, that gets lost. So I think a certain amount of respect is warranted, regardless of whether you're a conspiracy theorist or you're a coincidence theorist. That's something that I don't think anybody's disputing, that these first responders and firemen.
Absolutely, Bruce. And I will say that, regardless of whether or not the building came down via terrorists or you believe it was a controlled demolition, or you're a conspiracy theorist, the truth is that there was asbestos in the air and there was toxins, because of when the building was constructed, and even the survivors have long-term health issues regarding this.
Yes.
And that spans for, you didn't have to be in the Trade Center to conduct an illness. It was the ratio of when it actually came down was so fierce that it, you could have been just a simple restaurateur
there were people
a block or two away, and you could die of the toxins that were in the building.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we're going to start with, and we'll go a little deeper. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. You could donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description to help us get out more and more episodes and fulfill more and more requests that are growing more and more diverse by the day. It seems like bringing logic and reason to the world in an objective podcast has its place. I mean, we already have way more subscribers than I thought we would ever have and way more listeners. So it seems there are people out there that are actually interested in logic and reason instead of just dogmatically picking sides and peddling the faith in corrupt profiteers. Also, any comments, theories, rebuttals, debunkings, thoughts of any kind, leave them in the comment section. I'm sure we'll get a lot. There's a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of different theories on this event. Obviously, we'll at least in brief go over all of them. And you could also check us out: Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. All right, JR. So now we're basically got out of the way what is not disputed or what can't be disputed. I mean, I just don't think that could be disputed. Now, let's move on to the brief overview and some of the biggest issues. I mean, for me, the whole thing just had this air of weirdness, so to speak. Obviously, as it was unfolding on the TV, I mean, it was really unprecedented because obviously you had, Able Danger and all these other, I'm sure you know all about that. I mean, this was the early 90s where government personnel were specifically briefed on the possibility of terrorists using planes to fly them into buildings, particularly the World Trade Center. And I mean, this was almost 10 years prior to the 9/11 event. Let's call it an event. Some people don't believe they were exact attack. Whatever you want to call it, an event. What is your position on how that was handled? Because immediately after the event, the narrative was that nobody could envision planes being flown into buildings when not only is that explicitly not true, but planes being specifically crashed into the World Trade Center was specifically addressed and nearly a decade prior, and that's the public information. I mean, I don't know if you have even more information about that, but that's what was publicly known. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will say one thing, Bruce, and that is I think that the security surrounding the buildings, I can't speak to the American public as a whole because, if we're talking to somebody from Nebraska or we're talking to somebody from California, they don't necessarily understand the concept of what it was like in New York City prior to September 11th, 2001. But I will say that the one thing that I can say is that there were terroristic actions that were taking place before, in the early 90s, before planes crashed into the building. I believe it was Ramzi Youssef that, conducted the first, attempt to bring down the World Trade Center in a parking lot underneath the World Trade Center. So I believe that the security and, just the overall, I think, overarching confidence of Americans played into the ability for these things to occur. Now, if you don't believe that these things were to have occurred, if you believe that it was the government doing this on its own, again, that would also play into it because
Well, you're dodging the question here. My question is specifically about Able Danger and the fact that the government specifically knew, not just knew, but prepared for airliners being used to fly into buildings, is particularly the World Trade Center. I mean, my specific question is about Able Danger and how not just Able Danger, but prior projects and clear examples of how airliners being used to be crashed into buildings as attacks. The government not only foresaw that, because George Bush went on TV, and not just him, but other government officials, and said, well, we never could have thought that that would ever happen, and we have direct evidence of the contrary going back.
Well, I would reject that, Bruce. I mean, honestly, to be quite frank, the New York City airspace, if you look at it, with a map, from the perspective of, say, a pilot, the airspace is actually quite limited in terms of the areas that you're allowed to go to. and that predates 9/11. I will say that, like, I think he was maintaining faith in that regard. But what I will say was,
him and his father were specifically briefed on those not only those possibilities, but all plans put into action. And I'll tie it in here because I know people in the comments are probably going to bring this up. Was the morning of 9/11 the only time that NORAD was shut down to run, coincidentally, training exercises of hijacked planes? Coincidentally. I mean, obviously, the coincidence theorists write that off all as coincidence, but this is all tied together because obviously the government knew that, the military knew that it was a possibility that planes could be used to be crashed into buildings, specifically the World Trade Center, as attacks. That's my main question there. Why did they pass it off as if they had no clue that this could be done when we have direct evidence to the opposite?
American arrogance.
So what I can surmise from that,
I'm just saying. I mean, you're asking me a question. I mean, like, how was William Wallace able to sack Lower England? I mean, like, arrogance. I mean, like, there are certain things you have to ask yourself certain questions. Like, we felt confident enough within the scope of our military that we would be able to maintain, a drift where nothing of any,
all right, let me rephrase.
nature would be able to intersect the building.
I don't think
these were domestic flights. These were domestic flights. So you have to understand, if this was an international flight coming from, say, Russia or a country of some, consequence, there might be some sort of advanced warning alarm.
NORAD was shut down that morning. Can you shed any light on that, or are you not allowed to talk about that?
Well, I can't really shed any light because I don't necessarily know anything. But I mean, even if I did, I probably wouldn't shed any light on that. But that being said, I can, assure the American public that NORAD is never officially 100% shut down. There might have been low numbers of people on staff that day, but
all right,
there were still operators.
Let me come at this from another angle. Other than on September 11th, so let's go pre-September 11th, because we all know the security measures that were implemented afterwards with the TSA, the DHS, and to this date.
Well, not all of us. I mean, there are many states in the nation that don't understand the level of security that occurred after 9/11. They simply just were not close enough to be exposed to it.
Well, people of a certain age, let me put it that way, because the response now there's criticism there too, because the last time I checked, which was a number of years ago, the TSA hadn't caught a single terrorist. There were only like CIA test agents that were caught, but there were and the security was found very lacking. I'm sure you've looked at the reports. There's always back doors and everything. So really, it was just this multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar waste of money. But that aside, because I mean, there's a certain. It's kind of weird. If you're out to do bad, like if you're some terrorist, you're not going to go through their security. So you're either going to find a back door, or you're going to use you're going to be at a private airport.
Yeah, it's the old phrase: if the gremlin's going to get you, he's going to get you. That's the way it works. I mean, like if you're a terrorist and your sole focus is to, liquidate something, you're not going to use regular tactical measures in order to, most of these situations, I mean, throughout history, I mean, even beyond the U.S., most terrorists, they use very, very, very odd, very out there type circumstances to get what they want.
All right, so you're basically okay. So you're not going to go out of your way to defend the TSA. That's nice. All right, but but anyway, my point was.
Well, let's look at it this way, Bruce. I mean, look at medication. Medication is sealed, because there was a Tylenol incident where there was the cases of cyanide and so on and so forth. But if you look at toothpaste isn't sealed. So
right,
what
stop giving
stops
people.
someone from putting something?
Stop giving people ideas, Jr. So,
I'm just saying simply that it's not
all right,
a field product.
let me make the point. So the point is pre 9/11, when security was not what it is post 9/11. Every time an airliner, domestic or not, private jet or not, every time it goes off route into restricted airspace, whatever the case may be, a fighter jet is scrambled within minutes. And yet, the only time in history when that didn't happen in modern history is on the morning of 9/11. So, obviously, coincidence theorists who can't think critically or employ logic and reason, they're going to pretend that doesn't exist. But to all the critical thinkers out there, how can this be rectified? Because we have direct examples. I mean, there were passenger jets that, for whatever reason, pilot error or just equipment malfunction, they go off course. There's fighter jets next to them within 2 to 3 minutes or whatever their response time is. It's very quickly because the U.S. doesn't mess around with that. I mean, I forget when those new measures were implemented. It was probably the 70s. But since the 70s all the way up to 9/11, other than the morning of 9/11, there are fighter jets scrambled immediately.
Yeah, it was during the Cold War that initial system was initiated.
Okay, so all throughout the 80s and 90s, and yet on the morning of 9/11, that's the only time you have not just one airline, but multiple airliners allegedly, and we'll go into the issues with the airliners, but for this moment, let's assume those airliners are what were reported, and they had the people that were on them. Why were there no jets scrambled? I mean, when you look at all of that, like, how do you rectify that?
Well, there were jets that were scrambled when it started to attack Washington, D.C. During the Twin Tower incident,
Let's start with the World Trade Center, and then we'll move on to the Pentagon at the end.
I think that in terms of the Trade Center, the one thing that busts my chops, especially as an American, being a public, entity of America, there is a certain level of optimism. I don't think that anyone wanted to believe necessarily that it was either A, a controlled demolition, or B, it was,
let's
some
focus.
sort of
Hold on. Let's focus just on the lack of jets.
So I think that, when the first plane hit, it was regarded as error.
Yes.
To the American people, whether or not that was the case is the subject of debate.
But here's the thing: error or not, a fighter jet would have blown it out of the sky before it would ever crash into any building in New York City.
Not necessarily. Not in when you talk about the breadth and span of buildings that exist between the Twin Towers and New York.
No, hold on a second. But it went off course.
It's not like it.
No, but it went off course way earlier than that. So they would have had a fighter escort.
It did. But you also have to understand that it was within a scope where no matter what, where it was located when it went off course, it would have killed people. Regardless of, it wasn't like it was over the sea.
No, but it was over the water, or even if it was over land, it would have only killed the people on board, and at worst, a couple people under. It's not. They would have never allowed it to get that close. It's not like, see, if this was a helicopter, and the helicopter was going to somewhere at a New York City airport, and it accidentally veered off and crashed in, that's all believable. Because if it was supposed to be there, and there was either a pilot error or mechanical malfunction, but we have not one, but two 757s that went off course far earlier before they ever entered the restricted New York airspace, which is as you pointed out, that's some of the most restricted airspace in the world.
It is. And, the airspace, the restriction is vast. Again, I can't speak to why the federal government didn't react in a more aggressive fashion. I am not the federal government. I'm just simply an employee. But I can say that no matter what, if they shot down the plane before it hit the towers, it would have killed people.
Well,
I
okay.
think that
I'm going to dispute that as well.
there's a certain amount of wait. I just want to say this. I want to point to the American optimism that this was not what it was when it was, and that's one of the things that we've lost since 9/11.
No, but here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. The protocol would be to blow it out of the sky. It doesn't. You're right. It would have killed if that's the plane. Because the next point I'll make is that we'll go over all the theories, but if it was the plane alleged with the alleged people on it, the protocol would have blown it out of the sky no matter what, because they're not going to chance it killing even more people. So that's the protocol for a reason. So even the first plane, it's not really believable based on all the evidence. Now we have, for whatever reason, NORAD was shut down, whatever. For whatever reason, it was allowed in restricted airspace. Now, the second point, what about the second plane? So it's already unbelievable with the first. Now, after the first, you have the second one. That definitely wouldn't have been allowed, even if the first one was, and even the first one's not believable. But let me get to the next point. So I'm sure you've heard the theory, so let me get your take on it. And there are airport employees who've testified to this, and there are actual airport logs that show that these planes with these numbers were actually not in the air. They were grounded. So one of the theories is that either these were other planes, like cargo planes, that were switched, they were swapped, or the two. We're only talking about the World Trade Center right now. We'll get to the Pentagon, but the two planes that hit the World Trade Center, they were holograms and they were not real planes. And before I get into the evidence for that, again, I'm not saying that's true or untrue. This is mind shock. We go down every single mind shocking avenue and every single theory. But you've heard this theory, correct?
Yes.
So what do you make of that if the individuals that were supposed to be on the planes were grounded somewhere else? Now, whether they were killed separately or whatever craziness, I mean, there's a lot of theories out there. Some of them, the people are still alive. Some of them, the identities were made up. Some of them, they were given new identities and pretended to be killed or whatever in a lot of these situations and government operations.
Well, I don't really, I mean, like in terms of the people on the planes, like if you want to go down that rabbit hole, the fact is, Bruce, is that people died, regardless of whether or not they were on a plane or they were in a building. They died. So, and that's been verified. So
hold on. This is mine. Hold on. This is mind check, so I have to stop you there. Just, and for all the listeners out there, this is the extent of my research. I stopped researching the 9/11 conspiracy because I went on the 9/11 tribute website, the official.org website, back when it was up. I think they took the whole thing down because they actually had, I think, photographs and names of just about all of the 3,000 victims. I only went down the first 10. I went down 10 people, and they were all still alive with new identities using their same name, and they didn't even dye their hair. One of them became a CNN reporter on, coincidentally, the morning of 9/11. Other individuals that alleged to work in the building had other government jobs. Now, I only verified 10, so I looked at 10. Maybe a lot of that's not true, but I left the website and I went to these individuals' own Facebook pages and I went on the CNN website. I verified this information. So at least some of the people alleged to have been victims in the building apparently are not. So that's why when I open this podcast, I think what everybody can agree on and what is verified are the first responders that died, because that was actually verified there's videos of them running into the building. They got their funerals, their families, you have their death certificates, unlike a lot of the people alleged to have been in the building. Now, I don't know what the numbers are. Maybe the 10 that I checked were the only fraudulent 10, and all the other thousands really died. I am not pretending to know anything. I don't know if the people on the flights died or not. I don't know if they were given new identities.
Well,
I don't know
Bruce,
if
I
they
mean,
were.
like obviously, it's been verified through multiple media channels of both Democratic and Republican that there were people that faked their death, or they had ulterior motivations, or other things. What I can say is that I can verify, and I would be willing to stake my house, that at least one person died in the World Trade Center. And that one person, I believe that their life is worth more than what the World Trade Center cost to build, and what the plane cost to take off, and what that plane took to crash
Well,
into.
I think everybody would agree with you there.
So if there's one person, and we're just working with the ideals of whether you're a skepticist or whatnot, the fact that even one person lost their life. I mean, look at the ship Concordia, the Costa Concordia. I mean, the fact that even one person lost their life, or the Titanic. The fact that one person lost their life, that, to me personally, as a public employee and as someone that's just a human being, whether you believe in God or you're agnostic, I think that trumps all theories, and that at least one person died. Therefore, there should be an extensive investigation.
Oh, absolutely. I was just asking regarding the plane, since we don't know, because I don't think that, because what does these airport employees that are stating in signed affidavits that this flight number was grounded and they could see it in front of them while they were watching the news? It to me, I mean, yeah, they could be lying, but to
Well,
me,
there's also the proposition of saving one's own skin. So I mean, like obviously, I mean, like we're all Americans, like blah blah blah, but we're gonna save our ass like anyone else in their own country would save their ass. I mean, like you may have been completely against Pol Pot, but brought next to a machine gun, you like Pol Pot.
but that's the point, though. Why would these? I'm sure there's even more employees who were too afraid to speak out because that makes them look unpatriotic, right? Especially back in 2001. Back in 2001, I think what a lot of people, especially the younger generation, I think they don't realize how 99% of people just believed the government about everything, and they just believed everything they saw in the idiot box. The attitudes have changed because even in 2001, the internet was not what it is today. The internet is commonplace today, part of everybody's lives, almost every moment of every day. In 2001, the internet was almost like a side attraction. It was almost like a rare video game console.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It was a video game. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it was like a side video game console that a very small percentage of the population knew well. People might have heard of it, but some of it still regarded it as some kind of fringe. Like, do you remember back in the day that some older people, they thought the internet was some kind of fringe fake concept that would never catch on? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. And and again, I mean, like my own grandmother, I mean, she didn't trust drive-through banking. Like the fact that you would put like money in in a box, and it would go to the actual banker through a tube, confused her. So I mean, yeah, that's Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
So
I
that's it. So
completely understand that.
I think people really need to think about that. A lot of people didn't talk on purpose. Now, and we'll get into. I mean, I wanted to just at least basically cover everything. Maybe we'll do another episode where we go really, really deep. I didn't particularly want to do that, but we'll see what the people request. It was requested, so we're gonna at least cover just the basics. So one of the things that the hologram theory has in its favor, and by the way, John Lear, who we have covered on the Mind Shark podcast, if you haven't checked out John Lear, we did 2 episodes on John Lear. He was the first person, I think, that he participated in a documentary that first launched the hologram planes idea. Now, hologram technology has been around for a really long time. And it's actually pretty good. A lot of the coincidence theorists maintain that it wouldn't look that good. But there's footage even from several years prior, I think 99, in 1998 or 99. Some of the Japanese hologram technology was incredibly realistic. Now, in one of the videos, I think it's during the second hit, the plane's wing disappears for like 2 frames and then it comes back. When I first saw that, I'm like, oh, well, that's a crappy video camera. It's a glitch. There's another angle. I think it might be the helicopter, the news helicopter footage, or from the top of another building. There's a completely separate angle where the plane disappears for the wing disappears for exactly 2 frames at the exact same spot as in the first video. So at that point, I was like, all right, that's kind of weird. I don't know what to make of that. And then there's a few other issues. There's the speed. So Boeing engineers have verified the speeds at which a Boeing 757 can bank. So the maneuver you see where the plane turns into the World Trade Center, that degree turn cannot be accomplished anywhere near the alleged speed. The plane would just break up, the engines would burn up. And you can actually look up videos of 757s shot in the 70s and the 80s where they're testing the planes with no pilot to see what kind of maneuvers, emergency maneuvers the planes were capable of, because these planes are made out of aluminum. They're not fighter jets, but even fighter jets, that's what's crazy. John Lear, who's flown, I think, 150 different types of aircraft, he said that even the top secret craft cannot bank, like the ones that are shaped like planes. I don't know about the UFOs, but he said any kind of traditional airliner, even the top secret ones, like they have 787s now, he said they can't bank like that either. So what do you make of that information? And then there's a couple more pieces. If you watch the video in slow motion, you can see the plane enter the building like a knife through butter. And it looks like there's some kind of delay on either supposedly the theory goes, they rigged the buildings with explosives. So if they blew the explosives slightly off from the hologram entering the building, does that explain the video where the plane looks like it just disappears through the building and it's however many fractions of a second or a full second off? And one more piece is, of course, the audio level. So a plane, you know how when there's a plane overhead, even when it's really far away, it's really loud. So on a New York City street, we have, obviously there's videos from people on the street. Would a plane traveling that speed, would it shatter all the windows just through to the sheer decibel level? And what kind of ear damage would it cost? Because depending on which experiments you're looking at, I mean, that would be sustained volume louder than a gunshot to all the countless people on the streets. And yet you don't see or hear that in any of the footage from the street or the witnesses afterwards. And I actually also knew someone who worked in a building nearby. They said they could not hear the plane. They could only hear the explosion from the impact, which is kind of weird because if the plane is approaching, there's a certain period of time where it should have been incredibly loud before it hit, and yet witnesses did
Well,
not report it.
I will say a few things. It is interesting when they show the actual building on fire, especially the second tower. It doesn't, you can't definitively see a plane going through it. That said, I won't discount the fact that a plane did not go through the building. Like I can't reasonably, even with all the conspiracy theory out there, I can't definitively say that a building, that a plane did not go through the building. But it is interesting that you don't see the plane in the fire of the second tower. What I will say is that, like, if it was a controlled demolition, what was the point?
Oh, you're not
Like,
seriously gonna appeal to motive, are you? That's like one of the biggest logical fallacies we go over on Mindshot.
well, I mean, it could be.
All right, hold
There
on.
are
Hold
reasons,
on. Hold on.
but
Let's save that. Let's not get into that. So the biggest mind shock for me, where this whole event, which we're calling it an event, it's just so nonsensical. It wouldn't even get greenlit as a B movie because it's got that many plot holes. But for me, one of the biggest mind shocks, all of this aside, is the paper passport that easily survived an inferno that brought down fireproof steel. And that's the evidence presented that these particular hijackers, oh, we found the paper passport. I mean, is that the silliest aspect of the event, or do you know of a sillier one?
well, I think the fact that they were allowed to enter New York airspace would be the silliest one. I mean, like,
Well, actually,
honestly, I mean,
now,
like
well, now
that's
that you
one of the
bring it
most
up,
restricted airspace in America. I mean, so I mean that's more restricted than California. So I don't really understand why it wasn't shot down sooner.
no, but the paper,
It
but the paper passport. Like, throw your passport in a regular fire and see what happens. And now we're talking about an inferno that allegedly brought down fireproof steel.
well, I mean, yeah, you're not even talking about an inferno. You're talking about jet fuel, where
Well,
it,
not to
it,
mention,
it,
and
it's
then
it's
what people don't know, I don't know how many people have researched the World Trade Center. It was a very well constructed building. It was specifically designed by the architect to not only withstand one airliner, but two airliners hitting it. Not to mention to withstand earthquakes, high winds, hurricane winds. I mean, the architect that designed the World Trade Center was not a stupid man. He specifically planned for this. So all of the steel, it wasn't regular steel. It was specifically fireproof, built to withstand several times the temperature of kerosene burning. Like, we're not talking about just barely up to spec here. We're talking about above and beyond. These buildings were constructed to stand for a very, very long time, specifically designed to withstand airplanes hitting it. I mean, when it was built in the 70s, when it was finished, construction was finished, that those were the goals because the architect even anticipated that there might be an accident and an airliner might hit the building. So it was specifically designed that it'd be structurally sound to not cause this amount of damage. And yet we have a paper passport that's used as evidence for the official narrative. Like, do you have any comment on that at all?
no, I don't, because something like that most likely would have been vaporized. You know what I mean? Like, it would just
Most
simply would have
likely,
been vaporized.
most likely. But
Just
okay. And then the only other thing I was going to go over is the Pentagon, where you have, why was none of the footage released? Why does it have a wrong timestamp on it? Why does it look like a missile? And can you think of a sillier narrative where again, we're talking about the restricted airspace of the Pentagon, and not only that, but as if these people that designed this narrative, it's like they're trying to make it as ridiculous as possible. They allege.
well, I will say a couple things, Bruce,
Hold on, let me
regarding
finish.
that,
I
and
just have
that
one more point. One more point. They allege that the plane made a descending corkscrew, not a straight line, a descending corkscrew, magically able to line up at ground level before entering the Pentagon. I mean, can you think, like, that's not even, you could, the best pilot on earth would not be able to do that. And the chance that it happened by accident is, I mean, I don't know what 1 in a trillion chance you could calculate. It's like they made the most ridiculous narrative. And let's not forget how many trillions went missing from the Pentagon. Like Rumsfeld was on the news on what, September 10th, saying that there were trillions missing, and then magically, where all the records are kept, that's where the impact at the Pentagon happened. I mean, can you make up a sillier narrative for coincidence theorists to believe?
No, I can't. I have to say that it's probably the perfect storm. I can't really, like, I'm not going to dispute, but I'm not going to, like, go into detail. But I will say that Washington, D.C. is probably the most restricted airspace in the United States of America, if not the world. It's an extremely controlled environment. So what I would like to know is, if they were able to do this, why didn't they enter the center of the Pentagon and blow it from the inside out as opposed from the outside in? So that would be a question that I would have as a citizen, not as a government employee, but just simply as a citizen. The other thing I would say is that, I mean, there should have been some sort of interference or scrambling well before they even reached the area of the Pentagon. And in addition to that, I will say that in terms of the economic thing, that's very convenient, So, I can't dispute that. Bruce, honestly, like, maybe I'm just not of the level of classification or whatever, but like, I can't necessarily dispute that.
So do you have you seen the wreckage photos? Because the wreckage photos clearly do not match the alleged airliner that has been alleged to have crashed.
It's shady, but it's the type of thing where, like, I would like to collect my pension, so I just keep my mouth shut.
Well, do you think?
But I'm not going to say that it's not weird.
Here's what I think is weird about that. There's a whole bunch of videos at the World Trade Center. Why would they not release? Because right after that happened, all these gas stations had their security footage seized, and like a nearby hotel that showed that aspect of the Pentagon, even if it was far in the distance, they all had their security footage seized. What would be the harm in showing the proof of the narrative unless it was botched and they simply just shot a missile or some kind of missile disguised as a plane into the Pentagon? Now, I'm not alleging to know what happened or didn't happen. Maybe the official narrative is true. It just, as you said, not only does it seem convenient, but there's a lot of laws of physics that seem to have been violated.
What bothers me is that it's the rungs of the Pentagon that were attacked. They were exterior rungs, which consist of mainly secretarial staff and innocent
and janitorial
staff
and
so on and so forth. Like, every American, I think, knows that, like, as you get into the interior rungs of the Pentagon, you reach more and more classified, a substructure. The fact that it was just like this thing on the outside, any terrorist would target the center piece of that. Now, obviously, I mean, and I don't necessarily know this, Bruce, but, like, there are sub-level components to the Pentagon. But, like, the interior rungs of the Pentagon are very, very restricted, to the point of verification of identity on demand, so on and so forth. So the fact that it was only exterior layers, which would consist of mainly household and congressional staff, does bother me. And that's something that I've always carried with me I haven't released that personally until I've talked to you today, but I do find it strange that if you were going to attack the capital of the United States of America, they got the Twin Towers right in terms of banking and security. So I don't know why they would fuck up. The other thing is why were there so many planes pointed at civilians next to the Capitol if they were terrorists? In other words, like why were there two planes that hit towers as opposed to if we were going to conduct a raid on the United States of America, why were there not more raids
Well, again,
on DC?
that depends on which narrative you're believing, because what I always found strange about the hardcore conspiracy theorists is they think that if the official narrative is false, somehow that means that either George Bush was responsible or the US government itself was responsible. That doesn't mean anything. It just means that the official narrative is false. That doesn't identify perpetrators because that's all unknown information. So, but of course, the coincidence theorists, they have this just indoctrinated into the cult of state and authority worship that they think any doubting of the narrative automatically assumes that the US government are the perpetrators, which I'm not sure, but I have no clue. I'll close this out with this one point for the doubters, for the most extreme coincidence theorists. Have you heard of the organization Pilots for Truth?
No.
I think they actually expanded to pilots and engineers for truth. These are thousands and thousands of pilots and engineers who doubt the official story because all of these pilots are saying it's not possible to hit the World Trade Center without tower assistance. They're basically flying blind, and the terrorist alleged to have done this couldn't even pilot a single engine Cessna properly, according to the flight instructor in Florida. So it's kind of it's just a stretch. Like if you're making this into a screenplay or you're writing a book, it would never get.
Well, I will say that it would be extremely difficult. I mean, especially I mean, I don't know how many listeners are actually from the New England / central area of the Eastern Coast, but if you are, you would know that it would be extremely difficult to navigate, especially with limited knowledge of, especially if you're, you speak a different language, to navigate to a specific building in New York City
What if you
and
only
crash into it.
What if you only have a couple hours of flight time in a single engine Cessna, which you weren't even demonstrated to have been piloting properly?
Well, I mean, the planes that crashed into the towers were not Cessnas, but
Well,
again,
according to
like
records,
let's make that a separate podcast, Bruce. I mean, like I'm getting tired, but
all
yeah.
right, so there are all these pilots who say it's impossible to do it, and even the best pilots on Earth cannot do it. And yet we're to believe that these inexperienced people, as you pointed out, they don't speak English, they don't have the experience in piloting even a larger plane. And then also in various European commissions have already determined that these are controlled demolitions. So they've already debunked the official narrative. This is peer-reviewed scientific journals for people that are into that kind of stuff. So that's the overview. We didn't go too deep, but this episode was requested, and it is 9/11 today. So, and as I pointed out at the beginning, the firefighters, the first responders, they're the ones that really deserve the respect and recognition for their sacrifice, regardless of whatever coincidence theory.
Absolutely, as well as the individual citizens that assisted people during the event.
Yes, them as well. There are good-hearted people out there, regardless of the events going on in the world. So let's end this on a positive note. There is hope for humanity, in my opinion. So, hope everyone out there stays safe in these troubled times. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you like the podcast, hit the like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.
And JR tapping out.
Catch you guys next time.
If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mind Shock. This is your host, Bruce McGuire.
And Sid Irwin.
And I have invited the Prometheus-minded Sid Irwin to dissect the 9/11 conspiracy further. If you haven't checked out technically what would have been part 1, 9/11 in Memoriam, which JR and I went over the vast aspects of the morning of 9/11 and what transpired, what could be proven, what could not be proven. And no doubt, as expected, there was quite a little bit of commentary regarding our podcast, and especially requests to analyze Building 7. So I have Sid Irwin on. He has some architectural knowledge as well, as well as all types of knowledge. So this will be an interesting breakdown. We won't be going super deep because it's, I don't know, not that it's a triggering topic. I mean, it is a triggering topic and we're already going over it, but a lot of this has been gone over before. So I just kind of wanted to maybe entertain a few theories that haven't and just do a quick overview. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. Otherwise, you won't get them. Also, you could just go to our channel, youtube.com/mindshock, and manually peruse our podcast because people say they haven't been seeing notifications, but you could just go to the YouTube channel page. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. You could also check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case, topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests, or depending on your tier, you can be a guest on the podcast as well. Okay, Sid Irwin, question number 1. What do you believe happened on the morning of September 11th, 2001?
I remember watching said video of the incident, and I mean, at that point, all I could perceive was that the plane had crashed into the said building, and vaguely remembering the collapse that later came. It took a little bit of time, all the same, but still, it was definitely a sight to see. Very wild.
Yeah,
But that's what my initial belief. I mean,
where you and upon further review, and as your IQ points climbed ever higher and higher to record-setting heights, what is your current perception?
I mean, for the area that the plane had struck the plane, I mean, for the area the plane had struck the building, I mean, I find it difficult to believe that, in the sense that it should have collapsed just like that, either at least without further assistance, or in some way, or perhaps a building that has certain structural weak points that pre-existed.
Would you be surprised to learn that both of the World Trade Center towers were specifically designed to withstand airliners crashing into them? Not just one airline, but a minimum of 2, possibly more. They were built specifically to withstand that, specifically built to withstand many times the temperature of kerosene, and utilized actual fireproof steel as opposed to regular steel.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Does that lead you to believe the official narrative might be a little bit far-fetched?
I mean, like I said, it's even now. You said since my IQ has risen.
Well, let me boggle or mind shock your mind further. It sounds like you haven't spent that much time researching the 9/11 conspiracy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it has been a
Okay.
while since I've had.
Okay, so let me just outline a few bullet points here. The number one piece of evidence pointing to the accused hijackers was a paper passport unscathed, recovered from the street, that somehow magically survived an inferno that completely incinerated fireproof steel. And yet the paper passport survived, not only barely survived, I mean, it looks practically unscathed.
That's upsetting.
Yeah, that I mean, not just that. I mean, that was on an official news report. Even the news anchor could hardly keep a straight face when he was reading. But that's the official narrative. So, would it also surprise you to learn that the alleged pilots supposedly were not even at a proficient level of a single engine Cessna? They trained at an airport in Florida, and supposedly they were not even proficient at handling a tiny little Cessna. And yet somehow they flew for the first time a gigantic airliner. Those were what? 747, 757, 767s. These gigantic airliners with no ground support. And they just magically performed the most like, let's suspend the laws of physics for a moment, because I'll bring up that point in a second. But the best pilots on Earth would not be able to fly blind into a building of their choosing in a city like New York. It's not like there was a single tower in the middle of a field somewhere that was absolutely gigantic in width and height where they couldn't miss. But even that would be a stretch if you've never flown the plane before.
Indeed.
So that's the ask, to believe that. It's kind of hard. Now, when I discussed this with JR, he didn't have too much to say about it, being a government employee, but it was an entertaining podcast nonetheless. But the maneuver that those Boeing planes, and this has been confirmed by Boeing engineers, and also emergency tests that were done in the 70s and the 80s. You could watch videos of them where they test. I mean, it was remotely tested, so there was no pilot, but they test the emergency banking capabilities of these gigantic airliners because they're made out of soft aluminum. These are not heavy planes. They can't be for fuel efficiency. They're very light, soft planes. They're not fighter jets. But even fighter jets, they can't perform that bank at the speed that was alleged, if you watch the video. So not only do we have to throw out the laws of physics, but we have to pretend that they're using, and this theory, so the theory goes, and correct me if you haven't, tell me if you haven't heard this before. The theory that there were no actual planes. Have you heard this theory?
Be honest with you, I just thought about that theory myself. Yeah, I never heard of it. Just hearing what you were telling me.
So John Lear, I believe he's the most accomplished pilot in the history of the world. He's flown 150 different aircraft. He has however many tens of thousands of hours of flight time in 150 different aircrafts. He's won every single award the FAA has. He said that it is and he's also flown missions for the CIA. He said there is no known aircraft in existence that can perform those maneuvers, and even if there were, there's no pilot able to perform them. His theory is they used hologram technology to simulate the planes, and theoretically there was supposed to be a third one to crash into Building 7, but the hologram machine broke, and they just let it crash down without the plane.
Oh, wow.
And there's also a glitch in one of the videos. I believe it was the second plane hit. The wing disappears for a fraction of a second. And then it comes back right before it hits the building. When I first saw that, I was like, oh, this guy's using some kind of weird old camcorder. It's a glitch. There's a second angle where the plane's wing disappears at the exact same fraction of a second and comes back. Completely different angle. Now, I guess it's possible there's some kind of weird phenomena that caused that, but it's kind of weird. And then, of course, I brought this up with JR as well. He had no answer. The decibel level. So You know, when you're outside and a plane flies overhead, even when it's relatively high overhead, if it's a larger plane like a 747, 757, 767, it's really loud, right?
Loud, of course.
Can you imagine if it was so? Can you imagine if it was that much closer to the ground? We're talking we're talking near gunshot level decibels
It should be.
sustained for maybe close to a minute. And yet nobody reports that. The people that I know, people that were there personally, they said they did not hear any plane, they just heard the explosion. So at that
What?
decibel level, would that shatter all the windows, all the large windows in the buildings? Would it would cause some hearing damage to people. And yet, supposedly nobody heard it.
Yeah, it definitely would have brought a lot of attention. That sound would have been more so. It's like having a thunder, lightning. That's in that kind of sense. You should hear it. If you hear it, you're gonna have to look.
That's something I haven't really seen covered too much, which is why I brought it up. I find it curious. Again, I'm not saying anything is true or untrue. I just found that a little bit curious. And then, of course, what is alleged to have happened at the Pentagon, where you have someone performing a 270-degree descending corkscrew, magically ending up flat with the Pentagon before hitting the Pentagon in the most restricted airspace in the world. And immediately all security footage is confiscated from all the gas stations and the hotels in the area. And the Pentagon's own security footage, which they only released one angle, I believe, it has the wrong timestamp on it.
Oh wow.
And furthermore, if you want to add to the coincidences, are you familiar with what happened on September 10th?
No, I'm not.
Rumsfeld had a conference. Rumsfeld announced that there was $2.3 trillion missing from the military defense budget or the Pentagon budget, whatever. And it's just missing. Nobody knows about it. So obviously there's going to be an investigation. Do you want to take a guess what part of the Pentagon was completely destroyed on the morning of September 11th?
No, I'm curious. Enlighten me.
The records and accounting department, where
Oh, boy.
where the missing money was to be investigated.
Oh, isn't that beautiful timing?
I mean, that's quite a stretch. Like you have to. 9/11 is one heck of a coincidence theory. There's quite a lot of stacking up there. I mean, there's plenty more to it. If the listeners out there, if you haven't checked out the podcast I did with JR 9/11 in Memoriam, we went over that. There's also some funny business regarding people that allegedly died who didn't die. Obviously, the first responders, they have nothing to do with any conspiracy. They just ran into a burning building to try to save people. And, they also reported hearing explosions and all those things. But anyway, and the other thing I mentioned too, just because there's a conspiracy, that doesn't mean automatically that it was an inside job. Or that doesn't tell you who's responsible. All that tells you is that the official coincidence theory doesn't seem to add up with the laws of physics. So what I wanted to go over today was simply Building 7, because this is something a lot of people don't talk about either. So Building 7 was not struck by a plane, yet somehow it magically turned into dust the same way as the World Trade Center. And we do have reference. Planes have hit buildings before in the past. They've hit buildings that were not built with fireproof steel and that were not built to specifically withstand not only the impact of passenger airliners, but earthquakes and tornado winds. They were much more poorly built than the World Trade Center. None of them collapsed. So, what do you think happened with Building 7?
Like I said before, either I believe this might be probably the lowest tier theory is that it may have been some structural integrity that may have been compromised even during like the building process. It was never referenced to or mentioned or just glossed over, and then information's you never know. You have to trust the source where it's coming from. They can easily tell you like, yeah, this is structurally sound, it's all set up, it's perfectly fine. And who knows? I mean, there should be people who should have been checked it and inspected it and make sure that everything's perfectly fine. But again, who knows? Even with them, they could have been paid off, bought off, and been like, you know what? It's whatever. Things will be fine as long as nothing super crazy happens, which it most likely shouldn't happen. Fine, stuff like that. Or again,
How do
there
you,
may have been set the explosions and stuff like that strategically placed that wouldn't be meant to collapse a building demo style. So
but how do you explain the surrounding buildings not collapsing into their own footprint?
again, well, there was that second 35. It's in a sense like a demo site. It controls explosions and all that. Meant to relatively contain that damage and destruction. Then it should be minimal influence and effect on surrounding buildings outside of that.
So there's actually 7 buildings as part of that entire complex.
Right. And only building 7 was the only other one that collapsed.
Right. Also, I don't know if you're aware of the timeline, but it was reported to have been collapsed before it actually did, which leads the conspiracy theorists to suggest that they were all reading a script and they read it slightly off time.
That's not good.
There's also all this funny business, of course. Well, maybe you're not aware, but there were insurance policies taken out on the World Trade Center something like 2 weeks before the attack, specifically for terrorist attacks. Then you have all the gold underneath the World Trade Center, which apparently there was some funny business reported with trucks and various other things where some theorized the gold was stolen. And the people that rented out Building 7, I mean, there was a lot of funny business with the renters of Building 7 as well. So, I mean, it is kind of strange. I mean, there are European studies that actually have found that the World Trade Center and Building 7 were all brought down by controlled demolition. So these are impartial. So these are obviously the one thing that coincidence theorists really failed to grasp, one of many things, is of course conflict of interest. If you have people working for the US government, not that they're paid off, but they're going to have a certain bias, right? They're going to want to believe the official story for the most part. Obviously, not all of them do. I mean, there's pilots and engineers for truth. There's all these organizations where hundreds, if not thousands, of leading professionals dispute the official story and they want a neutral investigation, not a US government affiliated investigation. Now there have been those. One of them comes out of Europe and they concluded that it was all controlled demolition. And if you just look at the videos, like if you don't know anything about the official story, if you live in a cave on Mars and somebody brings you a TV and they show you random buildings of controlled demolition, random videos of controlled demolition, and they include the World Trade Centers and Building 7, would you point those out and say, wait a second, that's not controlled demolition? Or would you assume because it looks exactly like all the other buildings of controlled demolition that it was a controlled demolition?
I mean, again, if I saw videos of controlled demolition, and if they did seem to compare precisely with that imagery, then I would say the same.
And what do you think that means in terms of the narrative? Why would they? I don't know. It's all kind of strange.
And you are correct, though. I mean, the reason why, the motive, just the logic behind what was done. That's always the big thing that explains basically everything. You could find that, then everything else would fall into place.
Well, some conspiracy theorists say that it was just, it was 10 years to the day when George Bush's father was in front of Congress on September 11th. That's when he made, in 1991, that's when he made his famous usher in a new world order speech.
Oh wow.
Just another one of many, many coincidences. If you look at Hollywood films, I mean, 9/11 is the chosen time that most of the clocks in the background of every single movie are set to, or at least movies that take place in New York or in big cities. And I mean, you have Neo's passport in The Matrix, his birthday, coincidentally, 9/11, September 11th. Yeah, I mean, you can go down rabbit holes that go really, really far down. It's some kind of satanic holiday involving sacrifice in numerology. You have 9 and 11, ascension to godhood. All of these things are very, very peculiar and bizarre, to say the least. The occult connections are quite bizarre. But what did it accomplish? It basically turned the U.S. one step closer to a police state, did it not?
Huh. It did.
So if that was the goal, I mean, you had the Patriot Act, then you had the NDAA afterwards. You had all these measures put into place that perhaps the masses would not have stood for if there wasn't a threat, real or imagined? And if there is no real threat, is one manufactured?
I mean, that, ever since I've heard, theories being placed, conspiracy theories being placed, that was one of my biggest thoughts as for reasoning that that would have occurred is, again, to be able to enforce a bit more restrictions, society at large.
It seems to have mostly worked if you think about it. And the military industrial complex guys were pretty happy about it because they make money off of war. And look how many wars were launched off of 9/11.
Indeed, cannot deny that.
So, is the crux of the issue, does Building 7 expose the World Trade Center towers?
It could. Well, I wonder if it did, though, what would the nation do in response to that information if that were the case?
I don't know. The cognitive dissonant sheep don't really do much, do they? They just continue to graze on their McDonald's.
Mm, yeah, that's my bigger concern. 'Cause, I mean, again, if you find out that you were lied to by ones you're supposedly supposed to trust, allegedly supposed to trust, especially on something on such a grand scale, I can't imagine you can't but be mad, do something about it. If not, that was not the case, then I don't know.
Have you heard the the allegations? I believe this was backed up. I'm not sure. There's a whole bunch of documentaries about this called Loose Change. I don't know why they're called Loose Change, but yeah, supposedly was it George Bush's brother, I believe, was in charge of a security firm that rented coincidentally the floors where the planes hit and apparent for the 2 weeks prior, and there was some kind of evacuation of sorts 2 weeks prior that was unprecedented, and they brought stuff into the building. And yeah, nobody was allowed up on those floors. There were guards and a lot of sketchy situations there. So if it was a controlled demo, is that how they carried all of that out?
It's definitely a distinct possibility. I mean, again, for something of that scale, you would have to be have probably a good amount of certain amount of explosives, and probably a place to store them while setting up. Probably over the course of how long was this established? Was it like weeks beforehand?
Apparently, a
Couple
lot
of
of stuff
days.
went down approximately 2 weeks before.
Yeah, so I mean that would give them time to prep and set this up without drawing too much attention for the process itself. I mean, I can't imagine them just coming overnight, one night, and just, not people not noticing, like, let's say 50, 60 people just planting bombs, or just, 60 people just like kind of coming into there, like, wait, why is that happening? Why is there so many people just flooding in and then flooding out?
Other people say that Flight 93 was the one that was supposed to hit Building 7, but what makes Building 7 that special, though? The World Trade Center was like, that's a symbol of the US, of America, and it's literally called the World Trade Center for Commerce, so it's, you could see why that would be a target. I mean, wouldn't it be more logical for them to try to hit, like, the Statue of Liberty or something?
That would definitely make sense as if you really want to strike a blow to America and its freedom, and then why not take out its symbol, Lady Liberty? Indeed, but I don't know. As they try to expose narrative, I guess, and then it's supposed to be, a quote unquote attack, I guess, on America's inflated sense of safety, I suppose, and then also they assume that again, if you just attack and like take as many lives as possible, it should be a big blow. Which again, that's always weird to me. Because I'm like, I mean, despite how many may kill in certain attacks, I mean, still it's. And there's still many people. I mean, even then, still, if you really want to call this like real terror and fear, and also to expose people feeling too safe. I mean, I believe in Britain like a year ago or so, or something like that. They had like either a bomb threat or an explosion at like a concert, which again, that's just lots of people there went to enjoy themselves, have a great time. That would be a far more, you know, understandable target to if you really wanted to incite, fear and chaos amongst the masses. Because again, that's supposed to be a safe place, a wholesome place. People just, relaxing, having fun, having a good time. But I'm not sure. But I don't know. Even with the I'm trying to remember even some of the videos from Al Qaeda. and supposed to discussing the reasons why as to that. My memory is
Are those the videos where Bin Laden gets younger and younger with every single video released?
very well could be.
Because they were showing videos supposedly but again, I don't know. Do you remember this was a couple years ago where they got caught? I forget who. Someone got caught. I believe British cables exposed the U.S. funding. They spent like $500 million making fake terrorist videos to send to news agencies.
I mean, that would be a sound theory. I mean, it could just.
So is that what they were doing? Yeah, the Bin Laden situation is kind of weird because how is he going to coordinate the attack from a cave with primitive communications links and no service?
Again, very good question. What I also thought about years ago, again, I mean, I'm not to old school communications that would have more consistent signals still on the communications like that. I don't know.
I mean, supposedly FBI, CIA, and NSA offices were in Building 7 as well.
So again, that's what I thought maybe just like how you said with the the Pentagon losing its accounting and records, maybe Building 7
Oh, you think
contains
there was
certain
a connection
information.
there with the missing 2.3 trill?
I'm just saying there could have been sensitive information that was contained in Building 7, so it as well had to go. Or if not certain information, perhaps it served a certain purpose that, again, just made it a target.
Getting in more into the realm of the occult, some believe that the Twin Towers and Building 7 represent the three children of Abraham. Christians, the sun, male, Boaz, right pillar. Muslims, moon, female, Jachim, left pillar. And the Jews, the star pillar of equilibrium, Building 7. The Pentagon represents the satanic 5-point star. 9/11 was a mass satanic ritual sacrifice. What do you think about that, said Erwin?
Um, intriguing theory, and again, still within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, this was posted on the Reddit sub Spiritual Awakening. But if you look at some of the symbology, it is kind of interesting. I mean, again, we're just stacking coincidences, but
And I believe in numerology, 7 is supposed to have some level of importance as well. As a number, I can't remember, not completion, but it has a significant value. So again, that could also, as you said, fall into the realm with the symbology.
here's the post. It was made by a user called Hidden Amoraka. We're not going to get into the similarities with America, but so basically, what would the ritual be used for? The answer was to enslave humanity, lower the collective consciousness, keep humanity in a state of sleep, fear, and put a spell, a hex, on the masses. The mass ritual was Kabbalistically done by the numbers to the T, as above, so below. Usher in the Antichrist, the false Messiah. Continue the trauma based mind control in America, which was put into overdrive after 9/11. Purim is a holiday in Israel celebrating the fall of the Twin Towers and America's stupidity in building their kingdom. After 9/11, Israel got the green light to use the U.S. military for the war on terror on all of Israel's enemies. World War III has been in full effect since 9/11. This is a psychological, spiritual, silent war on the home front, but very effective way of deception. The Q movement is the final entrapment. If you are having a spiritual awakening, you are bound to come to this harsh truth. You can run from it, but that is what they are counting on. Ignorance is a choice. So it's a very, very scary post. But the thing that stood out to me is the world was a very different place before 9/11. It was like, obviously, bad things happened, but there did seem to be a different vibe, for lack of a better word. It's almost like there was a more fun, happy to be alive vibe, even with all of the suffering. Obviously, there were wars and people dying and homelessness and starvation. But in general, when you're just observing humanity as a whole, especially in America, it seemed to be I don't know. The vibe was different. Would you agree or disagree?
I mean, I definitely just, I mean, sorry, I definitely agree in that sense. I mean, even now today, I can still feel that difference and that effect. I mean, it does feel like, things are, more closed off, more in a kind of lock and key kind of sense that, in some way, everyone is always being watched, or there's always that kind of sense of, that that someone, that's, you just, if you do meet someone, you can't help but also think to yourself, I wonder what lies beneath. As opposed to, again, like you said, a more open, hello, how are you? Just, just like, okay, you just see another person that you're just meeting. I mean, that's not, may not be the case with every encounter for people, even beforehand, but still, it's just that it seems a little less of, but at the same time, I mean, again, just like you said before, not to say that the world didn't have its issues before that. I feel like there's just, in some cases, that you just need time because, I mean, isn't like another attack or, quote unquote attack, or let's put it this way, a rather large scale incident has occurred in that fashion or to that degree in a while. So, I mean, just like most things, time after a while would, for some people, if not most people, just kind of push it to the background, though, or they'll just find a way. Once you get established and used to something, humans, they're supposed to just be able to adapt. You just adapt to it. Usually it becomes another part of life. You don't care anymore. You're just like, whatever. That occurred, or this is the thing now. You work around it. The inconvenience was annoying at first, but now you're like, well, I know how to manage to muddle through.
Well,
It's not as insanely oppressive. Even with this pandemic, that's a sign of that because I mean, certain people are meant to, quote unquote, stay inside and do these
I was
things.
actually, I
There
was
are many
actually
that
gonna
don't.
I was actually going to bring that up next. It's like the world will never be the same again. And
Yeah.
if the thing, we're not going to really go into the coronavirus too much, but I think we talked about it in other podcasts. But if you were, let's say, if some kind of Illuminati conspiracy is true, it would be too risky to have a real virus. It would be better to pull it off with a fake one, right?
I mean, it will be again control chaos.
Controlled chaos. Yes. That's a good way to put it. And was 9/11 controlled chaos as well? Because if it was all controlled demolition, if the planes that were alleged to have flown in the towers were actually grounded, I actually talked about it. Supposedly, there were airport employees who had eyes on the flight numbers that were allegedly in the sky. And then one of the other things I didn't mention to you, but the U.S., particularly New York and Washington D.C., is a very controlled airspace. Every single time in history, except for the morning of 9/11, anytime a plane goes off course, there's fighter jets that are scrambled inside of, I believe, even like 120 seconds. I mean, it's very quick because you can't just fly a airliner wherever you want. I mean, it's kind of dangerous.
I mean, I agree with that.
But for whatever reason, on that particular morning, they were allowed to fly wherever they wanted to, not once, not twice, but at minimum thrice. Because there was Flight 93 was the one that was shot down
I believe that was the one.
or crashed mysteriously. And there's also wreckage issues with that one. I mean, there are people who have done comparisons between planes either being shot down or crashing in a countryside. And there's usually a lot of debris and wreckage, but strangely enough, there didn't seem to be much in that case. But anyway, I don't know.
Definitely
There's
crash.
always a lot of unanswered questions. But bottom line, do you believe this was some Illuminati occult conspiracy, or was this perpetrated by a small faction of humans of varying allegiances to varying countries, possibly?
Um, Again, without anything heavily solid, I can't make a judgment.
I just gave you a ton of information.
You gave me a ton of information, indeed, but I guess not enough information on the except the global scale that cannot be ignored without the shadow of a doubt. But still, all the same for me, I do believe personally that there was an agenda behind that event.
Do you believe the responsible parties will ever be brought to justice, or is this going to slip through the cracks?
I imagine over the centuries, there are probably plenty of incidents that have slipped through the cracks.
Is this destined to be one of them?
I mean, considering the timing and again enough time to clean up messes and certain loose ends. Very well could be. Though I'm more intrigued to see if how things will play out going into the future. In a sense like this, I mean, considering that there's almost anyone and everybody has a camcorder recording device to capture almost any and every incident as it's occurring, since they seem to be so readily available to do that.
So short answer, yes or no?
No, I don't think incident like that would go. Any grand incident like that would go unnoticed or deep dived into figuring out what happened, unless someone.
There are plenty of people who claim to have figured it out. There's a whole bunch of different theories. I went over a couple, and there are plenty more, but that's all we're going to go over today. And there you have Sid Irwin's astute observations. So we hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mind Shock Podcast. If you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you like this podcast, hit the like button. Share it across social media platforms. Questions, comments, thoughts, theories, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. You can also check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.
And Sid Irwin.
We'll catch you guys next time.